Okay, this week I have a very special guest. It's Keith McMillen from KMI. I think probably everybody knows KMI, or everybody that's going to listen to this podcast, certainly. I personally should just have sort of like a little belt hook for my QNexus, which I carry with me everywhere. It's my utility object for getting MIDI into a computer. It's a fantastic little device. I also have a Cuneo, but there's an amazing number of things that Keith has had his hands involved in. And so I'm really anxious to talk to him about how he got to the point of being able to do that and some of the things that are rattling around in his head. Hi, Keith. How are you?
Very good, Darwin.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you. We haven't had that many long discussions, and most of them have been at the NAMM show, where you can hardly hear yourself think anyway. So,
this will probably be more than we've taken all together.
Yeah, probably so. That's and again, maybe it's also going to be nice to hear you rather than just watch your mouth move. Given what a noise fest the NAMM show is. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Generally speaking, for these chats, I like to start off by asking people to tell a little bit about their background, how they've become the person that they are in the media art world. And in your case, I'm really curious for the story. So could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Certainly. I was born in Bermuda to parents who were in the Air Force. We went back to my mom's home, Chicago, which is where I grew up, and I had 7 brothers and sisters, and we lived on the far south side where there was really nothing to do. There were 4 steel mills in walking distance, but no movie theater or library. So it was an industry town.
Right.
So everyone there tended to make up their own entertainment. And I think that had a large effect on how I view the world and view the objects in the world. I liked listening to things. It was a very exciting time, early 60s, like 63. I was 7 years old when the Beatles started becoming the Beatles.
Right.
And it was amazing. I had some older brothers and sisters who were listening and discovering the 60s, and I was able to observe this from the point of view of a 6-year-old. And, they were my big brothers and sisters, so everything they did was awesome.
Right.
So since they were into music, I wanted to be in music. And I have an early memory of summer vacation after first grade. I was a tinkerer, and I wanted a band, and got my brother and a friend and took a phonograph, took the needle off and stuck it on an acoustic guitar and made a speaker into a microphone and said, "We're going to have a concert." And my brother says, "Well, we don't know how to play any instruments." And I remember saying, "Yeah, but it's only going to be kids who are here anyway." And we put on a concert without knowing how to play any instruments. And I guess that kind of belies my affection for musical technology. From that point forward, it just got worse. Listening to switched on Bach for the first time was pretty amazing. These were unearthly tones, and how could that be? It was really fascinating.
Right.
And as a guitar player, though, I had an early resentment for synthesizers that were keyboard controlled. I just never warmed up to the black and white keys. So it's been a theme in my life for 50 years, really, trying to get string instruments to control synthesis. And it's a difficult marriage, and still not successfully completed. And it allows me to keep revisiting it as technology matures. So, but it doesn't prevent me from working in areas where other types of control are needed and appropriate. And I think that has led to a lot of the work I've done recently. I did study acoustics at the University of Illinois in Urbana, and it was a great time. And as soon as I was done with school, I moved out to California and started working on instruments. I did guitar repair in college to pay for tuition and room and board. So when I moved to California, 79, I guess, I started doing guitar repair and tinkering with synthesis. And it was a very exciting time for synthesizers and pop music and technology, micro-controlled synthesizers were right around the corner.
Right.
So it was, the Bay Area has been just a fantastic place to feed my habits.
Did you move to the San Francisco area when you moved to California, or did you start off in LA or some other part?
Worse. I moved to a commune in Sonoma.
Oh, awesome.
And lived with people, a few college friends and a bunch of other people. And we were a few miles from the ocean, so we had great fog, and it was very peaceful. It gave me a lot of time to reflect. And after a few months, I realized that I really had to do this seriously, otherwise I would not be happy. And then I moved to Berkeley, where I've lived like the last 35 years of my life.
Sure. Now, I am going to want to talk a little bit about instrument design, because to me you are you're a fascinating person to me, because I consider you sort of like a instrument inventor. And I say that because you don't necessarily invent, I've seen like crazy inventions. You tend to not go on the crazy side. Instead, what you tend to do is you tend to take sort of like already practical instruments and make them somehow better, or at least more interesting. So, if we look at your history, there's a lot of cases of this. But if we look at the stuff that KMI's doing, you started off with the K-bow, right? That was your first instrument? Yeah, so that was actually a bow for stringed instruments that gave a ton of axes of sensor information, right?
Right, it was Bluetooth and detected grip pressure, hair, tension, XYZ, length of the bow across the strings, distance from the bridge, angle of the bow with respect to the instrument. Very fundamental, very, very primitive signals, but you could then extract information from them and come up with triggers and use them for panning. It was a lot of fun.
Right. I also, though, had a chance to work with some people who had some experience with it, and it was an amazing amount of data. I think, in a way, almost overwhelming to people sometimes. Subsequent to that, though, you did the string port, which is the first of the KMI items that I personally spent a lot of time working with, and I found that really unique because. As a guitar player myself, I certainly appreciated having all the signals from the instrument, but also as a guitar player, I was fascinated by the kinds of things I could do. What in your, I consider you a very thoughtful person. What in your mind represents the fascination with individual string activity that you got with something like the string port, and going back to some of your earlier inventions too? What is it about that really spoke to you?
The guitar is an interesting intersection of polyphony and monophony in that you can use it just as a chordal instrument, or you can play melodic leads on it. And but in order to do both, you do have to treat each string like an individual. That's true for all of the bowed strings as well. And computationally, it's still quite difficult, if not impossible, to separate one string's activity from another if all of the strings are mixed into a monophonic output. So it is an enabling technology. It lets you do things that you couldn't do with just a magnetic, Les Paul pickup output.
Right.
And I think if you look at guitar as an instrument, modern, let's call it rock and roll guitar, electric guitar, it really became an instrument in its own in the 60s and has not changed much. People still want a tube amp and a Strat and a wah-wah pedal, and they're pretty happy. And I think that's wonderful, because a lot of great music has been made with that simple combination. But to take the bowed strings and the guitar and bass forward, a different type of technology was needed, and processing each string individually makes a lot of sense. You can, just from a musical point of view, you could have the low strings play a bass tone and the high strings play a voice tone. And I think if you play guitar with finger-picking style or classical style, that is pretty natural. Right. But it does let you distort one string without receiving distortion from another, so the intermodulation distortion mostly goes away. And you can do frequency analysis, pitch analysis to try to guess what the pitch of the string is. You can follow its amplitude. You can extract the timbre of the string. You can parameterize these and use them as control data. And this has been around for a while. I think the ARP Avatar was among the first instruments to have a polyphonic pickup. And even though it was a monophonic synth voice, it did have a polyphonic distortion. And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, wow, that's very smooth. That's unlike anything I've heard before.
Right.
So that's been extended through various eras of technology, and I have created more than half a dozen people would call pitch to voltage or pitch to MIDI converters, and I felt that the computer certainly was powerful enough to do all of that, and making different hardware is expensive and time-consuming. So the goal with Stringport was to have a way to bring each of the strings into a computer where you could run different processes on each of them. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like there was the VST wall where you could take up to 4 different VST effects per string. And took Miller Puckett's system, which he called SMAC. No, he called it SMEC, I believe, and we call it SMAC.
Right.
And worked with Miller getting that extended, and it's a real smorgasbord of processing. And I felt that it really allowed guitar players the opportunity to experiment in much the same way that people have done with analog synthesis. You can route the volume of one string to control the modulation index of another, or as you play higher up the fingerboard, you can have more compression and less reverb for clarity.
Right.
So it enables this. I think that, like you say, it may be a bit too much data. I'm not worried about that, though.
Well, it's easy to filter out data. It's really hard to make up data to fill in the holes.
There you go.
So I think you by doing that, you actually steered it in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. You can always ignore stuff.
Right.
There's still a threshold, though. I don't think guitar players in general have embraced polyphonic processing as much as will happen in the future. Roland has done a great job keeping it spirited, but at some point, as it did with the synthesizer, it becomes an appliance as opposed to a playground. People
Right.
once synths became programmable, polyphonic, and emulative. You didn't have to drag your B3 and your Hammond organ around. And that's fine. People use technology as tools to make their lives more convenient. But it seems like the guitar was deprived of that period of time when that level of exploration was new and fresh. There's still a lot of people exploring. And I think that will continue.
Yeah, I think, though, too, one of the things that makes guitar kind of a wonderful instrument is that it's an instrument that allows for sloppy play in a kind of a creative way.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's that sloppiness. So I got into guitar synthesis with the old Roland GR300. That was my first guitar synth. And I love that thing, but boy, playing it was a completely different experience. And the sound of it was completely different, even though it tracked very well and it was quite responsive. It also really forced you to think about technique in a way that a lot of guitar players never really think of it, in terms of cleanliness.
Right.
But
and not to stereotype, but when I first got into this, it was through my company, Zeta Music, and I started off building guitar things. I mostly start companies to build things for myself. And because some hobbies you just can't afford. So
right.
If you turn it around and make it a business, then you can't afford not to. And what was interesting at Zeta, even though it started off guitar-based, I was approached by a lot of violinists. And a very different type of customer. They were all very polite, educated, on time. They could read music. And they were used to spending a lot of money on instruments. Guitar
Right.
players, while there are equally as many who are talented and disciplined and can read music, most guitar players are, like you said, a little bit sloppy. And that's one of the wonderful things about the instrument is it's easy to pick up. But people expected to get a guitar, an amp, a cable, a case, a capo, and a book for under $200.
Right.
So by targeting violinists, I was able to keep my day job as a guitar hacker.
Sure. Well, it's interesting, though, that you kind of open the door there to talk about the creation of companies, because I think you're right. I mean, not only does it give you the opportunity to do stuff that might be expensive as a hobby, it sort of makes it so that you're very motivated to succeed. Because oftentimes there are now other people that you have to, focus on, and the development of customers and developing stuff that can ship is tough. And so, in the Zeta world, you move towards violins. I actually work with violinists. Stana Vasulka still uses a Zeta violin along with a string port for doing her work. I've been helping her re-engineer some of her earlier work, and it's pretty awesome to work with. But within KMI, you started off again with string instruments, but I would say that the things that really changed the game for the business side of it were things that started looking keyboard-like. So, I think the first thing that I saw that was like that was the soft step. Yeah. Which, when that came out, I started seeing those everywhere. It seemed like it was your first really popular product. Would that be right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I started KMI. In 2005, I sold a company that I started called Octave. And, I had a chunk of money. And I thought, well, I'm going to play music publicly, which I want to do with my trio. And I'm really into this networking of instruments, which maybe we can talk about later. Mm-hmm. But after a couple of years of playing gigs and loading rack cases onto airplanes and putting up with equipment and brakes and having to drag backups, this is crazy. And that's when I started KMI, primarily to satisfy my own needs. And I was using the Behringer foot controller, which is quite ubiquitous, but it's heavy. And we had to carry 4 of those around, 3 in backup. And, that's like 60 pounds in a road case, so the airlines get $100. And I wanted the soft step to be small enough to fit into my briefcase or backpack and to do things. Right. And it was one of the first products that built on the smart fabric work that I started with on Cabo. It allows you to get this nice low-profile product that's very robust. And yeah, that was the first mainstream product.
Can you talk a little bit more about this smart fabric concept? Because one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the materials, how you got experience and how you got sort of like the expertise in materials. Because one of the things I find, so if we fast forward a little bit, after the soft step, you had the huge explosion that was the Cuneo, and then the one that affects me daily now, which is the work that you did on the Cunexus. These things are remarkable just from a materials standpoint. They're really responsive. They're multidimensional in terms of the sensing that you can use or you can ignore. But they're quite amazing. They're incredibly thin, but they are solid as rocks. And it's unlike almost anything else I have in my musical life, right? I feel like I could throw it out the upstairs window and the dog could bring it back in the house and it would work just fine. And I think you actually have like marketing pictures of people driving over their Cunexus and then playing it or whatever, right?
Yeah, it is tied together with a lot of the materials research that I did in order to make these products. like the soft step is actually like a 9-layer lasagna, and one of the final processes is actually baking it under pressure. And I've always liked the physical world and the materials in it, and composites, elastomerics, fabrics. These things have all evolved tremendously in a variety of fields, but it just seems they were not being applied to instruments with any vigor. And I did have some leisure because of I had some money in the bank to allow me to explore. And I think that's important and missing in a lot of companies, some leisure to explore technology and materials.
Right.
And I was able to hit on combinations that worked, like the cabo. I built 65 of them before I got one that worked right and weighed right and balanced right. And ended up doing things that if I, like all good projects, if you knew how hard it was, you'd never start.
Right, sure, absolutely.
But that thing has Kevlar with copper wires running through it, sandwiched inside, composites. And so this got me into the whole idea that we can apply these new materials to musical instruments. The cabo, it was the only way to do it. And so I cut my teeth on that, and then I felt, well, let's just keep going with this concept of integrating materials and building things that are more or less monolithic. By the time they come out of the oven after careful assembly, they are pretty much indestructible. And they're also kind of unfixable, so I had to make them. Yeah, that brought the burden of making reliability very high on the list, because they're not easy to take apart.
Right.
So it was a fortuitous combination. And then that small thing really was important to me after, traveling with all this old music gear. And
right.
I'd fight for every micron in size. And it makes it just, squeezes out anything that's unnecessary. And
sure,
I like that.
Yeah, well, it's remarkable stuff, and I know for myself, but also for a lot of people, this is an enabling technology in a very real way, because it allows us to take, certainly the laptop and the software environments do, but it also, as a keyboard or a controller surface user, it allows us to take our stuff, be mobile, be interactive with other people. And not only that, I can carry it around, but also when I get to the gig, I'm not taking up 3/4 of the stage to pull off my thing as well. I mean, that's also an important part of the smallness, is that it makes your kind of footprint on stage be less remarkable than it had to be before, I guess.
A lot more manageable.
A lot more manageable, right? That's a good way to put it. And so what is it that made you say, I got some time on my hands, I'm going to play around with fabrics? I mean, did you just trip over something? I mean, the nice thing about living out in the Bay Area is that you're going to have the opportunity to trip over new developments now and again, right?
Oh yeah.
Is that something that you tripped over, or is that something that you had a long-term interest in, or how did that happen?
Actually, through SynMat at UC Berkeley, Adrian and David had some fabrics, and the company was local, and the fabrics weren't designed for this purpose, but they were conductive. And I started working with the company, Ionix, with the bow. And we've advanced the fabric. We're on like 6th generation of fabrics. And I have it now behaving in spandex and meshes, different types of materials that have different characteristics. It was really difficult to get these fabrics from the hobbyist level to the professional manufacturable level that we have now. And it just was iteration. Like a lot of things, you just have to make some, try it, characterize what's wrong. And but the fabric world, the smart fabric, is not well known, and the problems were all mine. There was really nowhere to go to
no one to talk to about it, right?
No. And that, you know, there's a certain comfort in knowing you're not going to get any help,
right?
Because then you're not waiting for any help. So you take the challenge on, and it takes longer than you think. It's more expensive than you think, but you end up making progress, and that's enough encouragement to keep going. And the materials are fantastic. I get incredible dynamic range out of them. They're inexpensive. We just released a down market version of the Qnexus called the K-board for under $100, and it's got poly aftertouch. You can tilt the keys to do pitch bend. And I've had a lot of keyboardists who own a variety of controllers who say that it's their favorite because it's so fast and so accurate. They can play things on it at speeds they couldn't play on a traditional keyboard. And that's a lot like the electric guitar versus the acoustic. And I've work going on now on some full-size keyboards that will, I think, be very satisfying for players. And it, again, goes back to that original complaint I had with synthesis in terms of being able to have some expressivity in the sounds from an instrument that produces data other than on and off.
Right. It's one of the questions I was going to ask, which is, given that you got into guitar because you didn't really mesh well with the black and whites, it's kind of interesting that you've ended up kind of being one of the lead developers in new versions of the black and whites.
Well, it's a classic, and you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to spend a minute on it. But I love the musical instrument families we have, and in spite of all the things I've seen, there will be no new musical instruments. Sorry, it's not going to happen. It's like they would have been here by now.
Oh, sure, right.
It's difficult because it takes thousands of hours to master an instrument, and an instrument needs to have pieces to play, it needs to have teachers to teach it, and all of that's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great point, and one that I hadn't thought of before, but just you saying it makes it seem so clear. And some of it is, I think, because society right now isn't wired for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We are right now very into like short-term development cycles, come up with something new quick, and it's the shiny object until the next shiny object comes up. And that really is not conducive to saying, well, I'm going to come up with a way to attack the instrument and then come up with a pedagogical set of material that's going to be played on it and the educational backbone necessary to develop it through throughout. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that's really a great point.
It took a while. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting though because a lot of what you've done has been in conjunction with working with Adrian and David Wessel, who I think we're hoping for a new class of instruments, right?
Yeah, and they are, well, surfaces are important, and a drum head is a surface. So I think we can rely on that as a grandparent for instruments. And David did a lot of work with his slab, but getting these new instruments to be popular or ubiquitous or even available is really, it's an uphill battle. And we have pretty much explored all the useful ways to wrap a human body around something and blow into it, strum it, bow it, hit it.
Right.
And I don't know that we really need new ways to interact with objects. But what those objects do, once you do interact with them, still has a lot of area for growth and experimentation.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that's interesting about the instruments that you make is that they actually blur the lines between instrument types. So, for example, one of the things I really like about the Q-Nexus is because of its sort of multi-dimensional stuff, I can bring some of my guitaristic moves, particularly like a finger vibrato type movement. I can actually bring that into play in a synthesis environment without having to, do the whole guitar synth, and all of the other ordeal that involves. There's a blurring there between keyboardist technique and guitarist technique. And I find that really useful, but in a way that's sort of like angles towards new instrumentation, not by developing a new way to imagine a keyboard, but instead saying there are two disciplines and we can use little pieces of both.
Yes, and people have training in these instruments, and it's not learning something from scratch. I think playing an instrument is demanding enough, and then trying to get expertise on something that is fresh and new and not well known, it's awfully demanding.
Right. True enough. So I'm curious about something, and I'm just looking for your opinion here. But an awful lot of instrument advancements have taken place kind of angled out of the Bay Area. We've got the incredible world of Buchla. Zeta Systems came out of that neck of the woods. An awful lot of the musical software development happens from there. What do you think it is about the Bay Area that makes that such a rich environment for experimentation in how we do music?
It might be economics. I just don't think most of those people, most of those names really have not become giant businesses or successes. And I think in the Bay Area, people are accepting of minor changes and minor victories, where, like New York or LA, you really have to knock it out of the park to be noticed.
Yeah, you're either a star or you don't exist, right?
That's it, yeah. And people here are very supportive of each other, and generally, if you come to the Bay Area, most people try to figure out how to stay here, and I just like the community of it, and I think that makes up for a lot of the infrastructure that you would have in larger cities. And the proximity to Silicon Valley, Stanford, UC Berkeley, just the availability of technology, the availability of people who are comfortable with technology and are used to doing things with technology that previously have not been done before.
I see.
So it's an attitude, I guess, that we have here. It's everywhere, but just the concentration here, I think, has hit a level that self-sustains.
Right. Well, talking about attitude, another thing I really wanted to ask was how a person who has been I would say that maybe less so than some, but you're kind of a serial entrepreneur. A lot of the people that I know that are serial entrepreneurs have become allergic to hardware. Because software it's easier to find engineers, it's easier to imagine delivery systems, and it's easier to imagine a profit, right? Or a profit with less risk. Because you don't have to build 20,000 things before you've sold the first one. How do you, especially since you've got a background in doing software and even in running an audio-based software company, how do you decide to do hardware? Is it just because of the bad experience on the road, or is there some comfort in hardware for you?
Both of those, and to get software to behave, you need input devices. And I think the state of synthesis and processing available on a computer now is just phenomenal. But the ability to control it is, in a lot of ways, hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. And I just feel that my contribution in terms of the controller synthesizer world is more, I won't say important, but it's less populated than people making software. And contributions from people who improve that interface, I think, are appreciated, and it's a bit easier to stand out. If you don't have the channels to take your intent, your artistic intent, and push it out through your musculature and have it understood by software, it's not going to be satisfying. Something's missing. And I just have felt that void for so long that it's just, it is a comfortable place for me to fall back to, because it is what I've focused on. And I think it, like most things, still has a lot of room to grow, but I just don't see a lot of people doing it.
Sure, yeah. That's interesting, because I would say, I doubt that this is something you thought of, but it's kind of the fact, which is, I think that it's very difficult for a person to feel like they've made a personal mark with software as much as you can with hardware. I mean, I think that, and again, not to blow smoke at you, but I think that you've kind of sealed a place in history as an instrument maker because of the things that you're doing with hardware. And I think I think it's important, because the musical gear in general tends to be based on individuals with perspectives that move things forward. So there you go. I don't know. Well, I realize that doesn't leave you anything to say very much. Bad interviewing technique.
It's the instruments that persist. The hardware synths are enjoying a great resurgence because they are physical, and even though most of the same timbres are available in software form, it's just remarkable to see the resurgence of analog synthesis.
Yep.
And people have a need for this physical relationship with their instrument, and the computer doesn't provide that.
Very true. That's true. I really appreciate your sensitivity towards or about our physical interaction with the instrument. I think that that's really important. It's one of the reasons why, in my studio here right now, my Kurzweil K2000 is sitting in the corner, and my little modular synth has a prominent place, because I like adjusting a filter using a knob rather than a soft switch or something.
Right.
But I want to talk a little bit about something you said earlier, which has kind of intrigued me. I jotted it down right away because I wanted to make sure we talked about it, which is the idea of networking of instruments. I mean, currently, and I actually do a little performance thing that is kind of a deal that's about this, which is that about the only realistic networking mechanism we have right now is having players that are in tune with each other. There hasn't not been much exploration on the instruments providing any kind of conduit for communications between people. Now, you mentioned something about the networking of instruments, and I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit about your vision of what that represents, but also what you think the future of communicative instruments might be.
We're very early in this area of art and technology. So, anyone's opinion will have to be tested by time. But just as I'm adamant that there will be no new instruments, I think there will only be more new connections. The triometric that I played music with, all of our instruments communicated with each other through this large max patch that I wrote for 20 years. It's got like 700 windows in it. And it allows things to occur that, such as the violinist moves up the range of the fingerboard, my guitar is pitch shifted downward. Mm-hmm. Where what happens on one instrument affects another, or an area in the score will affect the timbre of the instruments. So I found that I started writing this stuff a long time ago, and it just kept evolving. And I was able to have people write compositions for this environment, and you can decide how much is written through, how much is improvised, whether the score is controlling the instruments, the instrument is controlling the score. Like, you don't move to the next part of the piece until the bass player plays this particular phrase.
Right.
And you listen in an entirely new way when one of the other players in your group can change the sound of your instrument. It's you have to experience it to know what it is. The closest thing that I can use as an analogy is if anyone's ever been held at gunpoint at an ATM machine, you listen to every word that guy is saying. And I just think there's so much room for artistic exploration here that we don't need no stinking instruments. We don't need new forms of synthesis. We're really an embarrassment of riches in terms of the timbres we have. Mm-hmm. But what we don't have is basic control of those from a given instrument, and then a cross-coupling of the control paths of instruments. And like a string quartet, the sounds blend in air to the listener, and I think we will have new quartets where they'll blend at the control layer in information before being expressed as audio. And it's just so much more enjoyable there, because you can have crazy thoughts and realize them. And that was another major part of what I really am here for on this planet is, I think, one of the reasons, quote, modern music or Western art music hasn't successfully integrated electronics is because you can't write a piece for technology that'll be playable in 5 years. And I think that we have to get to some stable software that will transcend space and time and simultaneously provide new reasons for composers to get up in the morning. And I think enjoying this cross-coupling of machine, man, and players is wide open. And when I show it to people, they get, well, they either don't understand it at all and want out as quickly as possible, which I understand, or they get drawn in and just see these possibilities. And you start having these crazy ideas. And what I realized early on is if you have a crazy idea and then you have to go write special code, and then 4 weeks later you get to hear what that idea sounds like, you're hopelessly biased. You're going to like it no matter what because of all the time you put into it.
Right.
But if you have a crazy idea and can realize it in 3 minutes and explore it with the other people you're making music with and the composer, well, there's no great commitment. So you will throw away bad ideas faster and find the good ideas sooner. And I think getting to a platform that many people can access where this is possible is going to open up the music for this century. Technology has had its mark, but it really has not been fully expressed.
I would agree, and I think that in the long run, we're going to see this little slice of time as being a really kind of immature time, wild and crazy, but it reminds me of like the days when they said that there were, people were just starting to build cars and there were 300 car makers.
Right.
With no standardization of anything. I mean, on one hand, that allows for crazy, wild invention. On the other hand, it does make it difficult to have to build any sort of history behind any one of them.
I think if you move that analogy back a little bit to like railroads, if you don't have track that you can run a bunch of different...
Everyone's trains on, yeah.
Yeah. And that's all we really are trying to produce here is some track. I don't care what really people put into the train to carry, what type of music. I just think it's important that there's some standardization that will allow some permanence to new music, and that'll let people learn it, master it, hear it played 50 years from now. And at that point, you'll get the great composers investing time into it, as opposed to most of the composers who have dabbled in it and felt its limitations.
Right. Well, Keith, I want to thank you so much for your time. Before I say that, I have one more question, which is, as one of the people that I think of as the significant instrument inventors of right now, what things are you looking to do yourself? What do you want to do next?
Well, I want to standardize the tracks, like I was talking about. Okay. It's really what is exciting. And making these instruments is very wonderful, and I enjoy it. But most of my free thoughts return to this concept and reality of making containers and systems that will allow new music, modern music, and integrated music and technology and history to flourish. And I just, hope I live long enough to see it catch on.
Well, that's really inspiring, and I feel really glad to know that there are people out there that really have the big ideas in mind, because that I think that you've really hit on something there that we need to we need to find some way to deal with. Thank you so much, Keith, for your time, for taking time out of your schedule to have this chat, and for just being willing to kind of talk all over the map. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Darwin. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care.
Now that was really interesting. It's always cool to hear an inventor talk about the future, and I consider Keith one of the real inventors in our world. So thanks again for listening this week. Please make sure that you let your friends know about this thing if you find it interesting. If you don't find it interesting, keep it to yourself. But otherwise, have a great weekend. I will talk to you next weekend. Thanks, everyone.